In these environmentally informed times, studying landscape and spatiality has become increasingly significant in all disciplines of humanities and social sciences, especially when we see migrations, forced evictions, and a constant flux of human societies becoming naturalized phenomena. The term spatial turn refers to a change of direction towards the study of spatial imaginaries in narrative media and literary texts. Mediated through the theoretical and methodological development of research in language and literature, this spatial turn helps us study the assimilation of landscapes, cityscapes, natural geography, urban geography, mapping, and transnational flows. Seminal spatial theorist Edward Sawyer defined the spatial turn in humanities and social sciences as a response to a long standing ontological and epistemological bias that privileged time over space in all the human sciences, including spatial disciplines like geography and architecture. This means that until the 20th century, academic disciplines of the humanities prioritized time, that is, historicity over space or place. But now it has become imperative to foreground the study of natural and urban spaces, of local landscapes, cityscapes, transnational flows, and other aspects of local spatiality embedded in the local rather than the global. A recent ongoing project of the British Council entitled Walking Cities may be cited as an example. Studying local spatiality in literature and filmic narratives is therefore perhaps an effective means for the non Western world to free itself from the pervasive grand narratives and tell its own stories. In this respect, this turn is of essence for the growth of the discipline of humanities in Pakistan, because we need to not only tell our stories based in local communities and cities, but also be able to develop methodologies and theoretical frameworks to help appraise these psychogeographies.
Dear students, please settle down because we'll begin shortly. Respected faculty members, worthy students, and distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. On behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Namal Islamabad, I, Nurulan Rahman,
and I, Sayyid Abbas Kareem,
warmly welcome you all to the second session of the one-day International Conference on Spatial Turn in Literature and Linguistics. Our second session is titled Subversive Spaces and Spaces of Dissent and comprises a keynote speech followed by a panel discussion session.
Our keynote speaker is Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan. Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan, PhD in English Literature and Post-Colonial, has about 24 years of experience in teaching, research, teachers training, and curriculum development. Since March 2016, he has worked as Dean Faculty of English Studies, Dean Faculty of Languages, and also as Pro-Rector Academics at National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad. Earlier, he worked at Area Studies Center, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, and International Islamic University, Islamabad. He has served on various Higher Education Commission Pakistan committees, including National Curriculum Revision Committee for English as its chair. He sits on various boards of a number of universities in Pakistan. His research work has been published and cited in national and international journals and books. So far, he has supervised 27 PhD and 82 MPhil theses in English and Urdu, including a number of research projects and translation from Urdu and to English and vice versa. Recently, the Pakistan Academy of Letters, Islamabad, has published his translation of Mustansir Hussain Tharar's celebrated Urdu novel, Bahau as Sorrows of Saraswati. He has vast experience working with US EFP and RALO at the US Embassy for the promotion of English teaching, language teaching in Pakistan. Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan will now offer valuable insight on the topic, Geographies of Discontent, Who and Where is the Post-Colonial? Sir, I thank you for your presence and request you to illuminate us with your keynote address.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Respected HODs and dear faculty members, my very dear students, Assalamu alaikum. I hope most of you would not have the feeling of being captive audience. You have? Because I saw many teachers, shooing them from classes to the auditorium. So I just want you to feel at home here. Take it as a big classroom. And I'm sure that you will learn a few things through these interactions and these discussions. We human beings have this very beautiful tendency that we keep on coining new terms, new ideas, concepts, because we get bored with the old ones. This is the major reason for some of our real material development, as well as some conceptual, theoretical developments that have happened in philosophy, in theory, over the pace of the centuries. I was thinking when I started reading about this spatial turn, I realized that now we are running out of ideas for our MPhil and PhD theses and for our research papers that we are all so in need of. And therefore, we must come up with something which is not new, of course, going by the biblical saying that there is nothing new under the sun. But at least in Pakistan, since we lag behind in epistemological terms, therefore, after exhausting and saturating post-colonialism and feminism and discourse analysis, now we must turn our heads to something new. And like always, this is encouraging that the Department of English at National University of Modern Languages has been and is still leading in a number of ways in showing the rest of the departments of English in the country and also other disciplines, in fact, how we can think of new ideas. This time I'm teaching a PhD class, and there my whole project is to kind of disrupt and challenge my own teaching for the last 25 years. Whatever I have been teaching so far, I am trying to renounce those ideas to my some very able students who see eye to eye with me. I was the one who introduced post-colonial studies at International Islamic University and also comparative studies, comparative literary studies, Pakistani writings in English, and from where the HEC took up the idea and then it became a common phenomenon throughout the country. And now while students are hooked on post-colonialism and its various naughty variations, now perhaps is the time for us to move forward and look other way while the world is, hooked on post-colonialism. And this is a good time. I was thinking that just as feminism and its variations led to, resulted into a new term, gynocriticism, just like that, the study of geography and its relevance in humanities and social sciences has resulted into a new, very helpful term, that is geocriticism. So now, in the very beginning, you can take it down that we have a new, sort of critical approach coming up for the students of research in particular, and they can now exploit it and write their papers and their theses and show the world that you are not far behind. Now coming to the topic itself, geographies of discontent, who and where is the post-colonial? In fact, as it has been said in the introductory sort of documentary film also, this is something not new, the study of geography. As also you understand now, perhaps since morning you have been listening to various speakers, that it has always been marginalized, while the temporal study of arts and humanities, social sciences, politics, as well as the study of the colonial machine, colonial apparatus, and our global experience of colonization, all of that has been done in terms of a linear progression. Because the Western theorists and critics, particularly those who belong to the Whiggish historiography, they want to and they like to look at human history in terms of its progression. That we have been, we lack progress, or we have consistently, continuously, we have been moving forward and upward in a linear but progressive manner. So all progressive thinkers and historians, like even Arnold J. Toynbee, for example, they looked at history in terms of this progress and the march of civilization, march of progress onward and onward. So this is one point that you should keep in mind, that we want, through such conferences and such debates, we want to take a departure from this traditional thinking about time and space. The second thing, as students, that you should keep in your good minds is the relationship between time and space. Because this is not merely a matter of writing a thesis or an article. In fact, without developing a foundational knowledge about these two very tricky, slippery, and elusive terms like space and time, zama or makan, you cannot be expected to contribute meaningfully and critically in this very vital emerging field. You have heard already, and you are quite familiar with words like global village, and also you might have seen William Blake's very famous line, to see a world in a grain of sand, taken from his, just for your entertainment, I thought I should write it down. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So we understand what does he mean when he says to see a world in a grain of sand. Or when we use the expression a global village, then it means that space has been reduced because of these post-industrial technologies. Space has been reduced so much that it has come to be contained in the hand of, on the palm of your hand, and it has been reduced to your threshold because of these super industrial technologies of the information age. So this was the situation before. And while we were studying and writing our papers, and we were, kind of gobbling these Western theories of time, such as historicism and neo-historicism. At that time, of course, we were influenced by a certain set of critics and theorists who, for a certain politics, they wanted to highlight and foreground the importance of time, mainly because, as I said earlier, that they want to see the world from their own space, from their own places from their own developed places. For example, if their view is Eurocentric, therefore they want to look at the rest of the world as less developed. And since the interactions and the globalization of the East and the West, because of the experience of colonization, as they emphasize, the East has also kind of joined the march of civilization and progress. So it's very easy and very convenient for them to analyze the whole human experience in historical terms, that is, which is focused in terms of time. But space is also important, as now you can understand from whatever you have heard since morning. Because when you, privilege space, then it means that you can detach yourself, and you can detach also various geographies who are either moving forward or lagging behind. You can study them separately, and you can have and give them individual, separate, distinct sort of attention to what they lag in, what they are deficient in. But if you look at humanity as a whole, that the whole of the humanity is moving forward. कि पहले ज़माने में हम वहाँ थे 20वीं सदी में, और 19वीं में वहाँ थे, 15वीं में जहाँ थे, फिर रेनेसांस हुआ वगैरह वगैरह. You know the whole story, how the literary, cultural, and political and developmental history is judged, gauged, written. You know that very well. So this march of human civilization and human progress, it started in these historical terms. For example, the modernity, the project of modernity started with Renaissance, and it, that was early modernism, and then it ended in, this modernism of the modernism of the early 20th century. And then it was disrupted because of the wars. And then post-modernity challenge the grand narratives, which again were, located and they were developed as grand narratives of history. They were all attempts to explain the human experience, कि इंसान किस तरह तरक्की करते करते और ख़ास लोकेशंस के ऊपर उन्होंने तरक्की की, लेकिन all of that progress without taking into account the individual spaces. मतलब ये कहना कि जी इंसान जैसे आप चलें, आप इंसान को छोड़ें, आप कहें कि जी पाकिस्तान 1947 में जहां था और 2022 में जहां पे है, 1971 में जहां पे था, 1965 में जहां पे था, तो you are, I mean, trying to develop a monolithic and totalistic kind of paradigm within which you want to see and study the pace of progress. कि जी पाकिस्तान ने इतनी तरक्की कर ली है. But why space is important? Because space tells us within Pakistan which places actually developed, which areas actually developed. Where does Balochistan stand in this march of progress and prosperity? Or when you talk in terms of space, and let me name a few places to you. For example, when you hear the word DHA or Bahria town, what does come to your mind, or what comes on the screen of your mind? Which word define these spaces? Gated communities, for example, that comes to your mind. Peace and prosperity and a healthy lifestyle and cleanliness, these things come to your mind. But parallel to that, in another locality, and both localities are in Lahore and also in Rawalpindi, that is Are Bazaar, Royal Artillery Bazaar. That also exists in the garrison city. When you listen to this space, then what terms or what things emerge on the screen of your mind? Yes, noise and traffic and dirt and these, gushing, oozing sewerage and all that, that comes to our mind. So it means that when you, in a similar fashion, when the developed societies and countries, when they talk about space, when they talk about human progress in temporal terms, then they gauge it in big temporal units, like in centuries. कि जी इंसानियत जो है वो जहालत के घटा टोप अंधेरों में डूबी हुई थी फलां सेंचुरी में, और वहां से जो है फिर वो मार्च ऑफ सिविलाइजेशन शुरू हुआ. And after meeting many hurdles and hiccups, we reached this point in time where now we are ready to, conquer stars and other moons in other galaxies, So when you talk in such big terms, then most of the marginalized spaces, the less fortunate spaces on the earth, that those spaces are automatically deleted from human memory, and they are whitewashed from human history. So that is why that now we say enough of this project of post-colonialism. That is why the question in my presentation, who and where is the post-colonial? Because the project of post-colonialism, unlike, for example, feminism, and unlike to some extent Marxism completely failed to bring about change in the human societies, particularly those societies which were previously, colonized and which continue to be colonized under the new garb and the new guises of neocolonialism. So, therefore, we are experiencing and we are seeing many geographies of discontent. And what is this geography of discontent? As you can perhaps see here, it refers to the unhappiness and dissatisfaction of individuals who live and often feel stuck in territories that are experiencing a development trap. This includes territories that have stagnated for long periods and been unable to develop. It also includes cities and regions that were once vital motors of economic activity, but which, as a result of the most recent wave of globalization, have experienced prolonged economic and industrial decline. And the inhabitants of these areas are increasingly dissatisfied with a system that they believe no longer serves them and are using the ballot box to vote for parties at both extremes of the political spectrum to express their discontent. Now, this kind of political, economic, social discontent is emerging in the world, which is giving space to political parties who are playing upon or who are feeding themselves upon the fears of the public, the fear of the future. This is an eternal human concern and question: what will become of me? Mera kya banega? Right? So, because they play upon that, yes, वो मेरे ज़हन में आया था लेकिन मैंने आपके लिए छोड़ दिया था. तो मेरा क्या बनेगा कालिया? This is an important question. And these parties which are, right-wing parties, as they say, in economic terms, as you know, for the last few decades, the trend was towards center-left parties. That is, in the world, a third way of economic system that was emerging. Therefore, for example, labor parties or democratic parties, they have been very strong in many countries. But during the last 10 years or so, if you look at certain case studies of France and United States of America itself, and in our neighborhood, India, and even within Pakistan to some extent, you can say that this politics of post-truth that started taking roots in the public imagination, it was because of these geographies of discontent. And this discontent is spreading by and in fact, very fast in a country like Pakistan, which is at the verge of economic collapse. So we cannot say that we are with the march of civilization, or we are part of this progress that the world is talking about. If we are this much discontented and dissatisfied, it means that we need to change the direction of our academic world and our educational system also. Now, you see, I have been going to places recently in Pakistan, and everywhere I, preached one thing, that the people of English studies, it's a big business in Pakistan. They must wake up and they must arouse their children, their students, to these new emerging realities. And this story should start where it should start in the curriculum, because our curriculum is frozen in the colonial times. Even if we tried very hard to change it in 2017 through the Higher Education Commission's curriculum, but still there is a lot of content which spreads this discontentment that I'm talking about. On the one hand, we are injecting these romantic ideas in among our students, and on the other hand, when they leave the university boundary and they step into this real world and meet their families who are struggling, then they suddenly forget everything which they learn in the classroom. It is because there is this undesirable disconnect between what is being taught here and what is being sought out in the market. So these kind of conferences, they are a wake-up call, for example, in my opinion. And they can tell us how we should change our curriculum in order to address the needs of the market. And that market is an important space, my dear, from where we remain disconnected and disenchanted until, we go into that market as earning professionals. Then we know what is at stake and what is at stake for our families. As for this application of spatial theories or geocriticism, as I said in the beginning, I would like to offer you one advice at the end. So, having collapsed the boundaries now between what many think of as real and imaginary. लिटरेचर वाले आपको क्या पढ़ाते हैं? रियल और इमेजिनरी को, फिजिकल एंड सिमियोटिक, ऐसा ही है. So I'm referring to that, and therefore I'm linking that academic knowledge with the real world here, because we are discussing the importance of space and the spatial turn in the study of humanities. So having collapsed the boundaries now between the real and imaginary, or physical and semiotic space, it should be noted that work in literary and cultural studies has tended in two directions in the past. One is connected with actual spaces, the space of proper nouns, so to speak, the space of proper nouns. For example, Maxi Sidhwa wrote, "My beloved city, Lahore in literature." That is a spatial study of literature. Or when people talk about Defoe's London, or when people talk about Charles Dickens' London in the Bleak House, for example, that is concerned with actual spaces. And one is more concerned with the type of space, the city, the factory, the home. Literary studies are interested not only in how literature reflects such understandings of space, how they operate thematically and at the level of plot and setting, but also in how literature shapes the understanding of space, how it intervenes in culture to produce new understandings. So this is where the post-colonial project has failed. I mean, it is still keeping us gleaned to, and we refuse to wean away from the charm and the romance of criticizing the long gone colonialist. And we are always entangled in the politics of identity. My identity, that is gone, that is being compromised, as if they are here to, snatch away our clothes from us. But this is not true. I mean, even if it has been true, over time we have established our identity in terms of our dresses, in terms of our cuisines. In fact, our cuisine has been able to conquer the rest of the world. Thank you very much. Right? But this is not the end. That thank you very much for conquering the world through our cuisine. You see? So our identity in that sense is established in the world. But what we are not taught and what we are not made conscious of through our education, through our curriculum, is the importance of economics, the importance of politics, and their relationship with the real world. That is our reality. So I'm sure that this is a very good first step in not only Namal, but from here it will spread, I'm sure, very quickly through research students to other parts of Pakistan. This consciousness that space is, the study of space is important, because we have been living for a very long time in this trap of identitarian politics, in this trap of post-colonialism, in this trap of mimicry and ambivalence and all that. So we need to come out of that trap, and this is the only way to tell the world that we understand the political economy of the study and reading of literature and any other kind of cultural production. At the end, I would just give you one example about the importance of this political economy and how politics and economy are directly linked with this spatial turn in humanities and social sciences. We all know very well, and I have been saying this very vocally throughout Pakistan, that this Harry Potter phenomena is not merely a matter of enjoying fantasy fiction. Because for the first time in human history, a school teacher who very cleverly used our Eastern sources, and she kind of assembled a cultural text that is Harry Potter at 7 books. And she earned billions of pounds from the books as well as from the adaptations of those books for film rights by Hollywood. So her billions of dollars, they are earned from us and from the rest of the world because we have consumed her texts. We have consumed her cultural production. And then the movies, and then whatever follows in other cultural forms. And as a result, we are poorer, and she is richer, and her country is also richer than before because of a writer, because she is paying millions of pounds annually in terms of tax to her government. So if this is the case, then how can we assert, instead of all the time whining about our identity, and our post-coloniality and our colonial hangover and our colonial past, instead of that, if our humanities and our social sciences are linked with these actual spaces in the world and the political economy of culture, then I'm sure that our students also will come out of that trap, and they will become creative writers and translators, and they will assert not only their identity, but also their politics and their economy in the world. Thank you very much now.
I extend my gratitude to Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan for his insightful and thought-provoking talk.
Respected audience, we will now proceed to the second panel discussion of the one-day international conference on spatial turn in literature and linguistics, which is entitled Representations of Heteropia in Literary and Visual Texts. We are honored with the presence of four venerated academics who will enlighten us with their discussion. I would like to welcome the moderator of this session, Dr. Uzma Abed Ansari. Dr. Uzma Abed Ansari is Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Graduate Studies at Namal, Islamabad. She received her PhD in Modern Literature from the Amsterdam School of Cultural Analysis, University of Amsterdam. Her PhD project was on the representations of Istanbul in Orhan Pamuk's Aura and his engagement with the nation-state mediated through the city space. She has worked on the musealization of the city, itinerant identities in urban spaces, and more recently, on decolonizing knowledge and research methodology in the humanities. Her research interests include decolonization, urban cultures, nomadology, and modernity. Ma'am, I please welcome you on the stage.
Now, I would like to invite our first panelist, Dr. Inayatullah. Dr. Inayatullah has a PhD in English Literature and is currently working as head of the Department of English Graduate Studies at National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad. Previously, he worked as Director, Quality Enhancement Cell and head of the Department of English Undergraduate Studies at National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad. Before joining Namal Islamabad, he worked as Director, Quality Assurance Division at the English Language Center of Taif University and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He has also served the Department of English at A University in Islamabad in the capacity of in-charge PhD program for a period of 2 years. Other than this, he has been part of the faculty at American Language Institute in Doha, Qatar, the College of Electrical and Mechanical Engineering of NAST, and the Capital University of Sciences and Technology in Islamabad. As a memory, trauma, and perpetrator studies researcher, so far he has published more than 20 research articles and HEC-approved journals, and some in impact factor journals as well. Dr. Inayatullah is an HEC-approved PhD supervisor and member of faculty boards of studies of several universities. So I welcome you on stage, please.
Our second panelist is Dr. Sibghatullah Khan. Dr. Sibghatullah Khan is Assistant Professor of English at the National University of Modern Languages, Islamabad. He is an awardee of HEC's Indigenous Fellowship, apart from being a research fellow at the University of Michigan, USA. Dr. Khan's doctoral project is a post-colonial or feminist investigation of the life narratives of South and Southeast Asian diasporic academic women in the American Academy. During his research fellowship, he worked with 2010 to 2011 MLA President Dr. Sidonie Smith at the University of Michigan, USA. He likes to work in the domains of trans or cultural, post-colonial or feminist, post-structuralist, post-modern or meta-modern, and post-humanist or eco-critical studies. His latest crush is poetics and politics of space and city literature. Going beyond essentialist, binary-ridden theorizing on literature, he is interested in looking at points of dissent. He is the editor of Namal Journal of Critical Inquiry, and he regularly contributes to the literature pages in The News on Sundays. Sir, please, I welcome you to the stage.
Now I would like to invite our third panelist, Dr. Farooq Nadeem. Dr. Farooq Nadeem is a lecturer at the Department of English at the International Islamic University, Islamabad. Farooq has authored a book in Urdu titled as Fiction, Kalamia or Saqafti Makaniyat, and English, Fiction, Discourse, and Cultural Speciality, which has brought him widespread critical acclaim and recognition in academic and literary circles. Interested in critical and cultural theories, he likes to debate literary texts with reference to their material and cultural context, ideologies, and politics. Currently, he's working on a book based on a critical discourse analysis of Manto's renowned short story, Tobdek Singh. Farooq writes short stories in Urdu with a foregrounding of psychological realism through linguistics and stylistic experimentations. So please. I now request Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari to commence this session.
Right. I hope I'm audible at the back. I fixed this mic beforehand. So, am I audible at the back? Okay, great. So I had prepared an introduction to this panel discussion, but since we're short of time and I don't want to take time away from our esteemed panelists, I'll just mention here that heterotopia is basically a word, a medical term that is for other spaces, spaces that are outside of our daily routine, ordinary domesticated spaces, commonplace world. And so, all other spaces outside of our mainstream lives. Now, whatever the heterotopia, the space around us is a manifestation of the intersections of our psychological states and materiality around us. The space that we occupy is an extension of ourselves. In Pakistan, how often do we think over the space surrounding us as a projection of our mentalities? How do we take care of our communal spaces? Do we invest in them, making them friendly and comfortable and beautiful for our community? Do we notice the beauty around us? Do we make any contribution to its beauty? And most pertinently, how are public and private spaces ordered? What nature of materiality and capital go into its ordering and classifications? So these are just some of the questions that our panelists, who are field experts, they will be addressing. It is time that we pause and look around us at the spaces we occupy and pay attention to how we cultivate those spaces aesthetically and on a communal level. Our panelists today are field experts in specific areas of literature and will discuss the importance of spaces in our lives as represented in the most significant cultural forms of expression, such as literature and film. Okay, so now the format of this panel is there will be a first round of questions followed by a second round. The first round, I would like the panelists to be slightly brief so that we can give more time to the other round of questions, which are more detailed. Now, my first question is for Dr. Inayatullah, who will initiate our panel discussion. The question is, what are the ways that heterotopia function as spaces that preserve memory, both individual memory and collective?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Uzma. You have already given a background to heterotopia. I would develop my argument on that. For students, mostly students are sitting here, so you must have heard this idea of utopia, and you may also be aware of dystopia, and then we come towards heterotopia. Now, utopia is an imagined world that is perfect in every sense. Utopia that doesn't exist on the face of the earth, because nothing on the face of the earth is perfect. Nothing is without flaws or problems. So utopian state or a utopian society is something that is devoid of any problems or any shortcomings. Utopia. Then we come towards, so all the good things that we associate with the society, that we can associate with the society, will make into a utopian state or a utopian society. Dystopia is, a kind of a society or a world that, again, an imagined world, a speculative world that is frightening, that is not good at all. So we are done with utopia. Dystopia now then let's come to the concept of heterotopia. Michel Foucault gave the concept of heterotopia for the first time in 1967.
And from 1967 to 1969, he talked on the concept of heterotopia for 3 times. Uh, and then he left it like that for other scholars to work on that and discuss that. But that was something that really made headlines. By heterotopia, he means a different world or a world that is the other of the existing world. So the way he defines it is that this is a world inside the world that we are living in. For example, he says brothels, a world, a space that's been othered by the world that we are living in. Brothel is one of the examples of that. Prison is another example of that. That this is a world inside the world. This is a space inside the space that we are living in that's been othered because it's different. Not only this, he gives the example of, let's say, a motel that's used for a honeymoon trip, because he says that the words that he uses in the essay titled as of other spaces, uh, dystopia, utopia, and dystopia. He says that, for example, the deflowering of girls, he uses the words as it is, the deflowering of girls that cannot be allowed in the world that we are living in. So we specify places for that and we call them as motels, where, because we feel that this has to happen in a space that we do not belong to. So a motel is a space inside the space that we are living in, but othered. Similarly, he says that prison is a place where we place people, a space where we place people who are not in conformity with the world that we are living in. Now this is quite a narrative that he developed, and there are reasons for that. Michel Foucault, he didn't have a pleasant childhood, if I may say. He used to call his father as a bully, and then when he grew up, he was a homosexual, and he was uh, very open about it. He used to talk about it, and believe me, that's the time when France didn't acknowledge gay partners or gay marriages. He died somewhere in 1980s, and gay partnership was acknowledged by the French government somewhere in 1999, and gay marriages took place. So he suffered because of this homosexuality and all that, and he was very open about that, so much so that he tried to commit suicide twice. So he is talking about those communities which are marginalized, which are not accepted by the world that we are living in, and which are given separate spaces. By heterotopia, so he says prison is one of the heterotopias, brothel is another heterotopia, and by an extension of that, ship is another heterotopia. He says that, like ship is there on this part of the world, but it's nowhere. We do not want to give it a space. We do not want to give it a specific place. So there are people on that ship, but they are disconnected with us because we are living on the land. It's there in the ship somewhere roaming around and all that. So, and then he talks about, and then there are different manifestations of heterotopias. For example, heterotopia of crisis. And heterotopia of crisis, he says that this heterotopia of crisis is no more there in the present world, though he is talking about maybe the global north or the developed west. Because if we look at our own surroundings, do we really mean, or are we really sure when we say that heterotopia of crisis are no more there? By heterotopia of crisis, he means that this is a space for people who are in a state of crisis, in comparison or on the yardstick of the standards that's been developed by the society. For example, if I may say, we had this movie Joyland. We do have that movie right now, and that found a space, the representation of people, those people found who are not accepted in the rest of the society. They found a space there, and that works as a cultural production as well. And that by that I come to the memory part of it. So these are heterotopias of various kinds. Heterotopia of deviation is another one. Another manifestation of heterotopia is the heterotopia of time. We cannot collect every single bits and pieces of time for a record or memory. So he says that museum is a heterotopia of time where we sort of uh, collect cultural artifacts that are relevant or important to our memory, to our history. So we place it there in the museum so that people come and then they remember their past and all that. But since then, and I'll connect it to the memory part of it. That was the second part of the question. But since then, as they say, uh, a lot has happened, and this narrative of limiting memory to museum has further been developed. For example, Nora's 7-volume work on site of memory, when he says that memory cannot be limited to museums and all that, because what museums usually carry is that's the memory of the nation state. While this whole narrative nation state in itself is flawed, especially in our case, if I may say, or in other cases where nations are made up of different communities. For example, when we stick to this concept of nation state and then we commemorate our history and memory by means of museums, it will, subsume to that one ideology of the nation state that's been furthered officially. While under that one mega narrative, there are multiple narratives by other communities whose past is not commemorated by means of such memories and all that. And there comes the concept of, multicultural memory and prosthetic memory and all that. These are completely different categories. Now, Nora says that for communities, there are festivals, there are songs, there are cultural artifacts, there are clothes, various manifestations of commemorating their histories. And of course, not all histories are commemorated. There are certain memories that we pick and choose and we commemorate them. A memory studies researcher will tell you that they'll define memory as this. They'll say that memory is not based on all the information that you have. Since childhood or since the beginning of a nation or a community till the present day, there is a lot of knowledge or a lot of information that is there. What you do that then makes some part of that information into memory is that you on purpose delete some of the information, you stick to some of the information, and then you secure that. Why? Because that information is important to you, that commemorates a certain activity or a certain event. For example, the incident that happened in Peshawar, the very unfortunate incident that happened in Peshawar. I'm not sure if what the government has done to secure stuff so that that event can then be commemorated. And then Nora also says that the site of memory, when we place stuff in museums, that in itself is not enough. People must be visiting those sites of memory so that then are bonded together, so that then they commemorate that event and all that. This is how individual and cultural memory is developed, and this is how it's stored. In terms of when we collect this memory to heterotopias, now one is that nation state narrative, and the other one is those multiple narratives which are then given by people who are living in those heterotopic spaces. Even at the nation state level, how many times do we visit these museums, and how aware are we about these museums? The rest of the stuff that, Astrid Earle, she is a cultural memory studies researcher, and then Nora's 7-volume work on memory studies. The starting point even is the nation state memory. How aware are we about that? And then comes, memory at the heterotopic level, or for people who are not in the mainstream. So So yeah, sites of memory for these heterotopic spaces or people who are living in those heterotopic spaces, the manifestations are many and in varied form: movies, cultural artifacts, songs, and festivals. But the starting point, of course, is the freedom of expression, that you let them survive and you let them make their own memory and store their memory, and then they commemorate things or events that are relevant to them. So I believe that answered the question.
That does. Thank you so much, Dr. Inayat. Now, for Dr. Sibghatullah, since he finds something poetic in the everyday and he's also a poet, I was interested to ask you this question: that is there an aesthetic dimension to heterotopia? And if there is, what are some of the ways in which such spaces are aesthetically defined? And before you begin, I would just very, with excuses, I would like to request the panelists to keep their answers, at least at this stage, a bit brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh, it always happens whenever I have my turn. People say that you have to be short, and there is something strange, ironically strange, that in such conferences, panel discussions, you are always hard pressed for time, and you just cannot say things. Okay, so I'll be doing my bit. Thank you for your very good question. In fact, Dr. Safir's talk was very enlightening in many ways. He has touched almost, all those very important areas that we need to think of in our research areas. For example, MPhil PhD students need to get hold of these things, and they need to come to grips with these new ideas coming around. His part of the post-colonial was very engaging, I must say. So overall, I mean, it was very stimulating for me, at least. Thank you, Dr. Safir. Dr. Inayat has very exhaustively defined heterotopia. So I'm not going to define heterotopia again. But in one or two sentences, I would say that in very simple language, that heterotopias are those places which are not normally lived by the normal human beings in everyday life. So when somebody goes to the hospital, it is not an everyday routine. It is something, when somebody goes to jail or prison, it is not normal. That is why these places are called heterotopia. Same for brothels and other places like this. Same for museums. Ruins. People go to ruins not every day. I mean, they may take excursions to ruins. Like Dr. Rosma likes going to ruins. They may arrange one-day trips, but it is not an everyday phenomenon. So all those places which are not normal in the sense of everyday human life, in simple language, are heterotopia. So we are concerned about the representation of heterotopia in literature and arts. In fact, it is very intriguing for me to think of how the Western colonizing mind, one must say, or the Eurocentric thinking style, I mean, how they wanted to be the leader of the world and how they wanted to police the thought process of the rest of the world. Though I cannot do anything with Aristotle now, but Aristotle, when he gave 6 constituent elements of tragedy, he placed spectacle towards the end of that list. So it is, in fact, what we are talking of today is the spectacle, the setting, the scene. He foregrounds this discussion. The crux of poetics is character, plot, relationship, or character and plot. He spends a lot of space on a discussion of character and plot. Why? Because he was going to spell out linearity, and linearity is concerned with time. And that is why spectacle was placed towards the end of that list. But somehow, when we use the word the spatial turn, it is a triumph of space over, you can say, the historical world that we have had so far. Herodotus, the first historian, when he wrote History of the Peloponnesian War, he in fact was spelling out the time, the way to write history, and the way things should be put in a sequence, in a temporal order. And then, as Dr. Safir was mentioning, the later historians, Toynbee, A.G. Wales, and many others, even our historians, they have been placing things like that. But we are not concerned with the temporal or the sequential presentation of things, or you may say narrative that is connected with time. What we are concerned with today is to talk about how space operates in literature and how it operates in arts, in paintings. For example, people might not have been looking at the space arrangement of Mona Lisa's painting, Da Vinci's painting. People have always been looking at Mona Lisa only because the centrality of the man's centrality or human centrality. Now, maybe after today's talk, when we get back and we want to look at Mona Lisa, Da Vinci's painting Mona Lisa, we might want not to focus Mona Lisa, but the space around that painting. That is what we are trying to say. If space has been mentioned in literature or if it has been made part of arts or movies, largely they have given a subordinate or subservient space to space, I would say. Now, in a way, you cannot say that it has completely conquered the temporal. The spatial has not yet completely conquered the temporal. It has only tried to, rub shoulders with the temporal, and it is trying to be at par with the temporal. And if, like we have many theorists like Soya, even Edward Said talked of the imaginary geographies. Arjun Upadhyay Rai, when he gave his concept of the scapes, ethnoscapes and idioscapes, so especially his ethnoscapes, he calls them cultural, global ethnoscapes. Soya, Edward Soya, Dr. Rabia had given a quote from Soya. Soya gives the concept of third space, and in fact, imaginary geographies, global ethnographies, third space, heterotopia, all of these are almost synonymous terms. Dr. Uzma and I were talking before, we came up here on the stage, that heterotopia is not something monolithic in a way. I mean, there are other terms that may replace it. So if Soya gives third space for this term heterotopia, at least we, the literature students, shouldn't confuse it with Homi Bhabha's third space. It is not that, mind it. His kind of third space that is coming from Soya it has got the features of materiality of space, physical, in the physical or material sense. But Bhabha, when he uses the idea of third space or interstitial spaces, it is all imaginary. It is nothing physical or material. So what I'm getting back to Dr. Uzma's question, I have to say that space has its aesthetics and space has its poetry. Everybody lives, in their homes. Everybody has got a favorite spot to sit in their homes. They develop affiliations even with their beds or the side of the bed that they sleep on. That is how houses create their spaces inside your hearts. So you think that you are living in your houses, but houses are living inside you. So space has its own poetry and it has its own aesthetics. I would refer to Gaston Bachelard. In fact, it is spelled out as Bachelard, since it is French. So its pronunciation is Gaston Bachelard. He has written a beautiful, beautiful book on, in fact, focusing only on a house and how space works for. And that is why I'm mentioning aesthetics of space with reference to Bachelard's idea. So he tells us that it is not only you who inhabit the houses, houses also inhabit inside you. And houses, why people use this word, a dream house, whenever they have this housing colony or this housing scheme, the word that is frequently used is, you can have your dream house, because houses are the places where you can dream. So when we just expand this idea of the home space to the city, so we know that probably we are living in no more living in the times of cultural anthropology. Maybe we are living in the times of anthrocosmology. So this is not my term, but they say that when it comes to spatial turn, anthropology gets very easily replaced, as Dr. Safir was trying to drive this point home, that it gets very easily replaced by cosmology. So anthropology is man-centric, it is human-centric, and it is linear. So when it comes to cosmos or space, it is no more anthropology, it is anthrocosmology. So I would say that yes, space has got its own aesthetics and its place. In fact, I want to mention many literary references or references from literature where we can have very pleasant examples of how the space has been used or it has been ignored. And before we move on to the next question, I would really very quickly, because I'm guilty that time is short, I have brought for you just a poem, not that long, by Richard Wilbur. The poem's title is The Writer. The Writer by Richard Wilbur, his daughter is writing a short story, and he is coming downstairs, and when he gets to know that his daughter is writing a short story, he stops in the stairwell in the middle. And then the typewriter also stops. So what he says, this is very interesting, but I have been teaching this poem for a long time, not focusing on how the space has been used. So when I read this poem again, with this idea of space in my mind, in fact, all space vocabulary was coming back to me in this poem, and I forgot about the rest of the things. For example, you can just listen to the way he uses space vocabulary in this, and you would forget about what he wants to say. This is The Writer by Richard Wilbur. In her room at the prow of the house, where light breaks, and the windows are tossed with linden. My daughter is writing a story. I pause in the stairwell, hearing from her shut door a commotion of typewriter keys, like a chain hauled over a gunwale. Young as she is, the stuff of her life is great cargo, and some of it heavy. I wish her a lucky passage. But now, it is she who pauses, as if to reject my thought and its easy figure. A stillness greatens, a stillness greatens, in which the whole house seems to be thinking, and then she is at it again with a bunched clamor. Then he is reminded of how a bird was trapped in their house, and when the bird made an exit, he thinks his daughter would also make an exit and complete the story, and he refers to this. I remember the dazed starling which was trapped in that very room 2 years ago, how we stole in, lifted a sash, and retreated not to affright it, and how for a helpless hour, through the crack of the door, we watched the sleek, wild dart. It lifted off from a chair finally, that bird, it lifted off from a chair back, beating a smooth course for the right window and clearing the sill of the world. So if you just count, this is not the entire poem. I have skipped 2 or 3 stanzas. If you just count the space vocabulary that he has used, you would be suddenly reminded of the fact that you have been reading this poem with reference to how the narrative moves on and what he wants to say, but in fact you have been overlooking how the space vocabulary has been used and how space is operating in the poem. So I'll stop here. Maybe I can say a few things more in the next question.
I want to add something. Should I? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very
You have a question coming also.
Okay.
I just wanted to, but please go ahead.
Okay, well, a few minutes after. Dr. Safir Awan sir, my mentor. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sir. Dr. Sibgat, my teacher, my mentor. Dr. Assalamu alaikum, my colleagues, and assalamu alaikum, dear students. The question of space is getting more and more important in our culture because in 20th century.
Can I introduce your book?
Oh, please,
for a
please,
while?
please. Yeah, please.
Dr. Farooq Nadeem has written a book on, in fact, how space works. This is in Urdu, and its title is Fiction, Kalamia or Sakafti Makaniyat. It is translated into English on the title page, Fiction, Discourse and Cultural Spatiality. That is the book. So he is the first.
Thank you, Dr.
And in
He
fact,
is
we
the
have
first person, in our friends who has written a book on space.
Yeah, in fact, we have a word in Urdu for spatiality now, makaniyat. I did not know this before, so.
Yeah. Thank you. So I started writing this book in 2017 and I got it published in 2018. I still remember Dr. Safir के अल्फाज मुझे अभी याद है. डॉक्टर साहब ने कहा, मैंने लगता है तू कुछ और ही लिख लेना, थीसिस नहीं लिखना. Same thing happened. I submitted my thesis in 2019, and before that, I got my book published in 2018. So nowadays, everybody is talking about space and place and time, and why we are doing that, particularly in academics. You know already that most of our research works that we used to write and most of the ideas that we used to have in our traditional criticism, they were concerned with existential angst. What is, by the way, an existential angst? In Urdu, we call it wujudi aziyat, wujudi curb, mean the life of suffering, nothingness, and alienation, isolation. What happened in the life after Second World War? Critics from France, they started thinking that the entire universe can be understood in terms of contradictions or in terms of binary oppositions. So the way blackness can be understood by in the light of whiteness. Similarly, we can understand isolation by opposing it through place and space. So structuralism, structure, is a whole, and individual is a part of that. So the structuralist writers, they started telling the existentialists that nothing can be understood in isolation. How can we understand or comprehend your entity in isolation? We are bound to study your character with reference to your socio-political conditions. Now, all of us know that social political conditions are always cartographic. Yani, somewhere cartography में तकसीमात करते हैं हम society को, है ना? Ethnic groups, we have elite class, we have bourgeois, we have proletariat, we have different classes, different races, colors, different differences, classes. So they said that human beings, whether they are real human beings or characters in literature, we are bound to understand and interpret them with reference to the social structures they have. So what happened? I mean, there was we can say a storm in a teacup. How? People said, yes, the tramps in the play Waiting for Godot, why are they decentralized? Why? Because they are unprivileged. So unprivileged people have a space, and that is powerless space. Similarly, all those characters, what about those companies who got so much benefit out of Second World War? And some people say that Coca-Cola is one of them. So all elite classes, they were not living with tramps in Waiting for Godot. There are only two people, they are marginalized. So marginalization is a space. Similarly, centralization, central characters mean people who are in power. They have a space. Similarly, they have a place. Since you have a place and you have a space, you have will. You have will, you have power, you have power, you have knowledge, you have knowledge, you have desire, you have desire, you have discourse, you have discourse, you have ideology. Powerless, no ideology. Powerless, no discourse. Powerless, no language. Powerless, no literature. So that is a spatial condition. I mean, there is a conditioning of all of us. We have been conditioned. Similarly, all our texts have been conditioned through their context. So context is a space. So we are bound to understand or interpret our literature, human beings, even language. What Saussure said in semiotics, in his theory of semiotics, he said, a sign is known by the company of signs it keeps. Similarly, Marxist critics, they started saying that human beings, a man is known by the company of, yeah. Similarly, a piece of literature, a genre is known by the other genres of its kind. So all these people, it means we are compartmentalized, not only in language, but also in our context, in our social. So this kind of anxiety, this kind of trend or vogue that we have, not only in literature, but also language, but in society, in politics, it is called cartographic anxiety. यानी कि हम इंसान जब से हमने होश संभाला है through in our evolution, जब से private property का concept आया है, we have been heavily cartographic. अब क्या हम करते हैं कि this piece of land is my own. आपने अर्तुगरुल देखा? अर्तुगरुल mean what they have, mean why are they fighting and why are they always having their swords against their enemies? For place, right? But within those places there are their spaces, gender spaces, spaces for their chieftains, spaces for the servants, spaces for the males and female soldiers. Similarly, on the other side, mean within Byzantinians, they are also fighting for their lands, but within those boundaries they have their spaces. चलिए मैं आपको एक एग्जांपल दूं. मेरी दो बेटियां, एक बेटा. एक ही घर, place is the same, लेकिन दे हैव डिफरेंट स्पेसेस। मसलन मेरा बच्चा बाहर जा सकता है, दही ला सकता है, जाके जब चिप्स ले आता है, साइकिल चलाता है। क्या मेरी बच्चियां गली में, उनको इजाजत है इस तरह की एक्टिविटीज को कैरी आउट करने की? नो। इट मीन्स योर प्लेस डिटरमिन्स योर स्पेस। सिमिलरली इट्स अ वाइस वर्सा, मीन योर स्पेस आल्सो डिटरमिन्स योर, हमारा घर है, all of us live in homes, and similarly home and house, there are two special conditions. Yani मैं housing colony में रहता हूं, there I have a home. So home is different from house because house is a place and home is a space. I feel homely or homely. Yes, ये special condition है. मैं आपको example explain करता हूं. मेरे all of us have homes. In home, these homes have been compartmentalized. Drawing room is a public space. Our bedrooms are private space. Kitchens are, luckily or historically, or fortunately, unfortunately, women's space. ठीक, ये इस तरह compartmentalization, similar compartmentalization we have in. ऐसा भी है सर, जहां पे कॉम्प्रोमाइज हो जाए। वो मैं एक दफा क्लास में पढ़ा रहा और फेमिनिज्म की, तो मैंने जाके एक सेंटेंस लिखा और मैंने लिखा कि फर्रुख नदीम ने मुसीबतों का जनानावार मुकाबला किया। हर कोई इसी तरह वो करना शुरू, हंसना शुरू हो गए। मैंने कहा ये देखें, ये कंस्ट्रक्टेड, यस कंस्ट्रक्टेड, जनानावार मुकाबला किया। तो मैंने कहा कितना कंस्ट्रक्टेड है। एनीवे, क्वेश्चन, अच्छा अच्छा, so this is how we can understand this concept of space. One critic has said that in recent times, space is the most abstract concept in our critical and literary debates. Dr. Usman, please.
Dr. Usman, just take few seconds. वो इन्होंने Dr. Farooq Nadeem sir was talking of home. In fact, I cannot resist the definition of home by Robert Frost. So, in his poem Death of the Hired Man, Robert Frost defines home. Home is a place where when you go there, they take you in. They let you in, let you in or take you in. Home is a place where when you go there, they let you in or they get you in. We can confirm it later on. This is a beautiful definition.
Mending wall है, that's also concerned with space and place.
जी जी, मैं
cartography की,
मैं बस home की definition बताना चाह रहा हूँ.
Okay, so I'll just begin with Dr. Inayatullah for the second round of questions. So these are more targeted questions, and my question for Dr. Inayatullah is that am I audible now?
Now,
is this fine?
Now you are.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'll keep the mic very close to my mouth. So we often see representations of museums, libraries, and even monuments in literature and film. So what is the significance of representations of spaces of collective memory in these cultural products?
All right, thank you, Dr. Uzma. The hierarchies the hierarchies of places that Dr. Farooq mentioned, interestingly, Foucault talks against that. He says that from 5th century to 15th century, there was this hierarchy of places that was there. So much so that in the theory of cosmology, he says that everyone had this belief that the cosmos is that is geocentric, that is Earth is the center of the universe, and the sun and moon and the rest of the things revolve around the Earth. So he says that even in the theory of cosmology, hierarchy was there. There were these fixed roles, and everyone accepted that. And church was the body that basically patronized the whole system of hierarchy. So unfortunately, the same hierarchy, if we have it right now, Foucault basically goes against that. We may disagree with Foucault, but this is what he questions. And then he says that in 16th century, Copernicus, who was one of the clerics, he gave a mathematical model that no, sun is the center of the earth, not sun is the center of the universe, not earth. And then that was, of course, then confirmed by Galileo later on by means of a telescope, he basically established that no, sun is the center of the universe and the earth revolves around that. Why is Foucault giving this example from cosmology? He says that uh, church took exceptions to that. Church said that no, as per the teachings of Christianity, earth is the center of the universe and the rest of the things they revolve around that. But then Galileo was completely against that. He insisted that no, I have proved that sun is the center of the universe, and then he was house arrested, and he lived the rest of his life in a house arrest because he went against the teachings of the church, and he was convicted of heresy. So much so that despite all the teaching, all the stuff that he had done, he was not given a proper burial. And later on, once he was buried, and then later on, he was given, after some time, he was given a relevant burial. So 16th century onwards, according to Foucault, we went against this hierarchy of places, and we went for multiple. We went for spaces which coexist, and then in those spaces we gave those spaces to people who are not acceptable, who are not uh, conformists to the powerful people, to the powerful community, and then the places where which they occupy are called as heterotopias. Now, when we talk about their portrayal in movies and literature, uh, I read Mohsin Hamid's The Last White Man, published in August. Uh, I hope most of you have read that. There is this character of Anders, the protagonist. The starting line of that novel is that the first sentence is that Anders got up in the morning and he had gone all brown. So this is how intriguing the start is, that Anders, being a person with a fair complexion, he has gone brown all of a sudden. He looks at his hand, and that's brown, and he is surprised at that. He is shocked. And then he sees a brown body moving in the bed, and he looks at that, and when he concentrates on that, he sees that this is his body, basically. So, Mohsin Hamid quite cleverly or intelligently then peeps into the mind of Anders, who is a white European, and the way he feels inside a brown body. So much so that he says, when he goes, he is basically working in a gym. The protagonist, when he goes there and he talks to the person who is managing the gym, and the manager says that if this had happened to me, I would have committed suicide. Brown body, brown color of your skin is brown. And then his beloved Una, she is also not comfortable with that. Now, when we talk about the spaces which are taken by the powerful ones, and then we look at the marginalized or the downtrodden, or the people who are not that powerful, what are the ways in which the privileged ones look at the others who are not of the same color, whose skin color is not the same. Mohsin Hamid in The Last White Man digs deep into that, and he brings forth some certain details which are, of course, we are well aware of that, but this is one of the strategies that he uses. And then, of course, about the museums that you mentioned, and this is we have seen in movies, of course, but in the museums, as I mentioned earlier, we lag so far behind in that. As I mentioned earlier, one of the agendas, one of the ways of if I may ask you, when was the first archaeology department established in Pakistan? The very first one was established at the University of Peshawar, not very early. This is the overall approach that we have towards museums, because very few people would know about museums, that these are memories of sight. There are books written on sites of memories, and these museums are sites of memories.
Sorry to
Yeah.
cut you in, but I think there's one novel by Kamala Shamsi, A God in Every Stone, and there's the Peshawar Museum is mentioned there.
Yeah,
and-
exactly. So the first department of archaeology was established there in Peshawar, and then later on. So about these heterotopic spaces, where, you know, people, marginalized people live, and their memories, the way they are stored. I don't believe that exists anywhere in the country. The only museums that are there, that, you know, subsumed to the yeah, exactly, the national narrative that Nora criticizes. So I believe there is a need to work on that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Naif, for that insightful answer. And for Dr. Sibghatullah, my question is regarding since you mentioned that I also have a fascination with ruins. So there is a concept known as ruin lust amongst photographers, especially. So could you comment on that ruin lust?
Uh, yeah, Dr. Uzma's question is about fascination with ruins. People have this ruin lust. Uh, Philip Larkin, in his poem Church Going, uses church biba, ruin biba, for somebody who likes ruins. Though that is not exactly the term, but Larkin coins this in a way. Any ruin bibber might like to go to the churches when they fall out of use. So anybody who likes to go to ruins and arranges trips to go to ruins and is called somebody who is having ruin lust. I don't know if there is any one word for it, but yes, ruin lust has been. I won't say that ruin lust has been presented in literature, but in the first place, ruins are part of heterotopias.
There's this one novel, The English Patient, which
No,
features.
I have this English patient, but
Okay.
what I'm trying to say is that ruin lust has not been presented there. Ruins have been presented.
Yeah, but if you read between the lines, there's an evocation of a sense of there's a city that is not in ruins, and then
Yeah,
there's a city that has been ruined by war or through time.
yeah.
So
Uh, yeah, in fact, I was coming to this point. Um, so, in the first place, we need to say that ruins are part of heterotopias. So, Mohenjo-daro, if somebody goes to Mohenjo-daro and wants to go there, and you have got a ruins lust, so you go to Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. Maha Khan Phillips, I think, in her novel The Curse of Mohenjo-daro, uh, she, she has she has mentioned in detail how what they were doing in those ruins, and uh, it is the story of two sisters. Uh, the other day we were talking on popular fiction, Osama Shafiq's novel, Snuffing Out the Moon. Snuffing Out the Moon also is on Mohenjo-daro's ruins. Yes, uh, Michael Ondaatje's novel, The English Patient, very famous. They have made a very good movie on that. You can see both in the novel as well as in the movie how a completely, a person, a soldier who is in fact burned completely and cannot be easily recognized. He's placed uh, in a deserted villa, Italian villa, because the setting is Italian. Um, then there is Canadian American nurse who takes care of that person, and then there are flashbacks coming. There are multiple flashbacks, and there are, there is point of view narrative coming from different sides. Even characters think of the books that they read when some flashbacks come from the person that they are taking care of. Then there is uh, a thief, also a Canadian thief, and an army engineer who is a Sikh. All of them, they kind of come to that place, especially that nurse and the patient. But these people also come to that place. Uh, so Michael Ondaatje has done a good job in terms of presenting this ruined space. So when you read the novel, he gives details of how how that villa has been, he presents it in a very fascinating way. And when you watch movie, you unavoidably go to look at the place, the kind of place that it is. So if somebody um, wants to check up on such places, I mean, the English Patient is one good example, as Dr. Rosma is trying to say. Uh, for example, if we want to move, if we want to talk of some other heterotopias, which might not be ruins strictly, but since we do not have as much space to talk of every kind of heterotopia, at least I can mention quickly some literary works like Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, um, where we have the entire story happening in a sanatorium, tuberculosis sanatorium. We have Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Cancer Ward, Ward number 13. The entire novel happens except the last two chapters in the cancer ward, and they are all cancer patients. Uh, so you have this representation of heterotopia. And just recently, since it is a kind of craze also, everybody must have read Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. Anjum, that transgender person, intersex person, lives in a heterotopic place that is called Jannat. That can be translated as paradise. That is in a graveyard. And you can just imagine that all kinds of places, all kinds of people come there and everybody is welcome. And this place is away from the rules of society. Rules don't operate there. And she, if I should use the word she for Anjum, uh, she has rooms, and every room has got a bed and also a grave. That is very strange thing. किसी होटल में अगर आप जाएं तो आप कहेंगे कि मुझे एक बेड चाहिए और एक कब्र चाहिए, तो ये आपको फैसिलिटी नहीं मिल सकती. But when you go there, I mean, since it is heterotopic representation, I mean, it is heterotopia, you have got rooms with one bed and one grave. That is the facility. So that is how this representation of heterotopia has been done in.
Because even dying requires space. Just
Yeah.
to give up life requires
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
And if we mention a few, since we were also supposed to talk of the visual texts, heterotopia and visual texts.
Yes, but I'm afraid we are running out of time.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna follow up with one very quick question for Dr. Farooq Nadeem, and we'll open the floor for questions, and then
Okay.
you can just.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm really sorry about that. I know it's disappointing. We're,
So
I
it
think, more
always happens.
disappointed.
It always happens.
So, Dr. Farooq Nadeem, you were talking about, thaqafati makaniyat, which is cultural spatiality. And I noticed that you did talk about spaces of privilege and capitalistic spaces. So I would be interested to know about, spaces of capital accumulation, spaces in cities, in communities where capital accumulates. So could you just talk a little bit about that and explain what is meant by such spaces where capital is the predominant thing?
Well, thank you, Dr. Usman. Yes, it works. It works. Uh, Space nowadays, the definition of space is conditioned with capital, and capital means city, urban cities. You can see the seeds of this kind of citizenship with the emergence of rape of the lock. You can see with the lifestyle of Pip when he left his village and he settled down in. You can see this spatiality changing. I mean, how industrialization was determining the space of individuals in 19th century, and later on in 20th century we see the collapse of time, space, and place, and all these characters we see they are in dilemma, rather they are in deadlock. They don't feel comfortable to express their thoughts and emotions and experiences. So this kind of deadlock can be seen. But nowadays, the space that we have, that's a digital space. We can see the reflection of this digital space in the in stories like speculative fiction, sci-fi, science fiction, and other adventures that are being written nowadays. On Pakistani channel, TV channels, we can see how spatiality of individuals is being determined through different discourses. Actually, the moment मैं इससे work in 80s, there was a time when we Punjabis, we used to watch the movies of Sultan Rahi and Mustafa Qureshi, Sudhir, and all these Punjabi characters. At the same time, we used to have movies that were based in urban settings, and these movies, in the heroes of these movies were like Nadeem, Muhammad Ali. And I didn't feel anyone in Punjabi films, any character victim to this anxiety of time. I mean, I didn't see even wristwatch used by Sultan Rahi and Mustafa Qureshi. Whereas on the other side, in urban setting, I used to watch the movies, and I would say, clearly I would see the wristwatches on the hands of, Wahid Murad, and they were having this, time come reh gaya zyada. Why? Because they were having different places. Pakistan place was the same, but they were having different spaces. So urban space has been conditioned with, according to one French ignored, I say neglected scholar, that is Virilio. He introduced a theory that is theory of velocity. So urban time has been conditioned with velocity. The moment I catch hold of this mobile, I easily become global. So
इसका मतलब है कि सुल्तान राही जो है वो स्पेस को रिप्रेजेंट करता था,
वो प्लेस को यानी एग्रीकल्चर स्पेस,
और वहीद मुराद
अर्बन स्पेस, वो टेम्पोरल को yes, we can see this, the human beings and human characters welded are aligned with speed of desire. What is Dr. Faustus? यानी वो हासिल करना चाहता है speedily, and he has to go to for a bloody agreement with Saturn, Iblis. तो अब देखें कि those people who are having power are even in urban setting, उसका दौर की रेनेसां की जो urban setting थी, how this this tragedy happens with the King Lear, कि वो उसकी the moment he loses his power, he loses his place, and he loses his place, वो उसको बाहर फेंक देते हैं उठा के, आपने देख. So ये ज्यादातर issue, because agricultural societies, they declined with gradually, and urban space, it became more important. And most of the literature that was being written, that is literature, is the byproduct of capitalist activities. You can see Magwitch and Compass and fighting because of capital, because of Miss Havisham is suffering because of capital. So this capitalist crisis can be visibly seen at this cultural. Frederick Jameson has written an article, cultural postmodernism or cultural logic of late capitalism. It can easily reflect capitalist crisis. It does easily reflect cultural crisis of American capitalism. So this is how we can understand the relationship between capitalism and literature, crisis in literature, crisis of individuals that are reflected through literary practices.
Since we are short of time, I'm just going to open the floor for how many questions? 2 questions. So if anyone wants to ask a question.
There's a joke with the audience.
I see a hand over there.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. My question is for Dr. Sibghat. Sir, actually my question for you is because of the fact that you keep interest in metamodernism, postmodernism, and post-colonial paradigms. My question is that can we link this metamodern concept with the concept of spatial turn, as both of the concepts emerged in the second decade of the 21st century? Since 2010, we came across these concepts, that these concepts are emerging and shaping world order in terms of politics, culture, literature, and discourse.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, your question is a very good question because they say that spatial turn is a child of postmodernism. I was reading a book, Dr. Zawar gave me that book, The Spatial Turn. The first sentence of that essay is, the spatial turn is a child of postmodernism. So the kind of in-betweenness or the kind of relativism or fragmentation of the subject as well as other things, the temporal distortion, whatever we see in postmodernist literature or postmodernist theory, that is equally good for metamodernists, because metamodernism exists between modernism and postmodernism. So they did not have any term for for representing the space between modernism and postmodernism. So this metamodernism came along. So it shares space with both modernist and postmodernist paradigm. So I would say, since space has been subordinated for quite a long time and now it is surfacing, so you are very right when you say that spatial theory can very comfortably and conveniently be linked with metamodernist as well as postmodernist, studies or postmodernist look at literature and arts. So it is very much possible because of the kind of nature that spatial theory has got. Because spatial theory, for example, if we look at it from the perspective of modernist idea, it would get restricted. For example, when we look at it in terms of transnationalism, because it has its applications in transnationalist domain also, then it gets easily linked up with metamodernist and postmodernist paradigms.
Right. So one more question.
Hello. Salam alaikum, sir. Sir,
Thank
my
you.
question is, sir, my question is from Dr. Farooq Nadeem. Sir, it is said that your place determines your space, as you mentioned as well, and that ultimately leads to your ideology. Sir, it is true, but sir, the place or space is always determined by something. For instance, if we take the example of colonizers, they had determined our place that created our space as well. And that space lead to a disastrous ideology of inferiority. So if my space is determined, how can I lead to an open and free ideology, and how can it be effective? And one thing more, sir, how can I create an aesthetic space or pleasure and poetry from such controlled space? Thank you, sir.
Almost three questions in one question. Dear student, first of all, I would like to say, I would like to draw the line of demarcation between space and place. Well, sometimes it happens that we have place, but we don't have space. For example, even in our day-to-day lives, जब हमारी दुल्हन अपने ससुराल जाती है, तो उसको place मिल जाती है आम तौर पर, space is not given to her. स्पेस लेने के लिए उसको या तो बड़ा जहेज लाना पड़ता है, या बड़ी आला एजुकेशन होनी पड़ती है, या फिर उसको यानी कि इन ट्रेडिशनल इन कन्वेंशंस एग्रीकल्चर यानी उसको बेटा पैदा करना पड़ता है. प्लेस तो मिल जाती है, स्पेस इज नॉट. प्लेस मिल जाती है, स्पेस. सेकंड एग्जांपल, so many centuries have these black people spent in America. But do you think that they have got their space? They have got place, but space is not given to them. Same is the case with our writers, in Anglophone writers. Those people who have migrated to New York, America, Paris, they are well placed, but still they are working, or they are making best efforts to get that space which is occupied by white people. So there's a difference between place and space. So place, if we get place, it doesn't mean necessarily we get then equal space. Well, in America, novel jazz, Toni Morrison. There's one Harlem Renaissance in New York. There's one in Manhattan. There is one area where this Harlem Renaissance happened. If you know the history of Harlem Renaissance, they were given one place and one space. They found that space where they could practice their activities, and jazz music and jazz practices and get jazz cultural activities, they were the product of those, social interactions within Black community. They got this heterotopian space in that, and then they started settling down in different areas of New York. It means sometimes first you get place, and then you start, searching out for your own, mapping out your own space. So that is, there is interdependence between place and space. For example, if I make my home, okay, and first of all, I need a map, and then I build a home. And after that, the question of space, whose space is this? And within that space, अब जब मेरा घर बन गया, जरा गौर कीजिए, अब जरा घर बन गया, हम सारे रहना शुरू हो गए, then our mentally, imaginatively, we start thinking about our own space. यानी कि मेरी बेटियां जानती हैं कि हमारा स्पेस क्या है, my son knows what is my space, all of us know that how much space we have. Sometimes, एक और मैं थोड़ा सा, I want to add something, sometimes powerful people, they encroach our spaces. यानी आप इतने do through cultural imperatives, यानी through supplication, through request, and something through commands. आप ये नहीं करो, वो करो. It means they are determining our spaces. एक मैं आपको एक मजे की बात आता हूं कि एक दास्तान अमीर हमजा, 48 volumes they were produced by our local writers, and within in colonial era, before that they were not published. Surprisingly, they were sponsored and they were patronized by Fort William College, or colonial Raj. White man ने कहा कि आप अपनी दास्तान को, get your दास्तान tales or folk tales published. 48 volume तक वो करते रहे, and they didn't know कि what is happening, क्या इनका theme क्या है, what is happening there, and why are they so much obsessed, particularly Muslim writers, ये क्या लिख रहे हैं. They knew it. Why weren't they disturbed कि यार ये तो अपना cultural, they are preserving their own cultural heritage. जो white man था, he didn't say anything. क्यों? वो कह रहा था कि all these stories that are there, they are about fairies, jinns, and about their past. अमीर हमजा दास्तान तिलिस्म होशरबा, जिन है, भूत है, जादूगर हैं. Let them enjoy in their imaginative space, since we have controlled their physical space. तो ऐसा आज भी हो रहा है कि हमें physical space दिया जाता है, imaginative space. We are unable to go for creative writings because our imaginative space has been controlled and encroached. So this.
Thank you, Dr. Farah. Now we can squeeze in one very quick question with a quick answer. So can someone please bring the mic over here?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Doctor, for your fruitful discussion. My question is related to the keynote of Dr. Safir, and I would link it to the discussion by the panelists. He said literature is not merely leisurely, aesthetically enjoyable activity. It has a purpose. So with avalanche of audio-visual products of Western literature, can we create space for the production of our own texts? Either it is audio or it is visual in this postmodern world, or still we are under the colonization, that is intellectual assault, because I think the colonization still continues with its changed shapes. So if you could elaborate whether we are post-colonial or still colonized, Dr. Inayat Khattak Sahab, please, you can answer.
All right.
You think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. First of all, I would like to give this disclaimer that the narrative of post-colonialism that we have bought from the Caribbean or the African countries, we need to do away with that. The kind of colonialism that was meted out to people in Africa and the Caribbean, and the kind of counter discourses that came from there, I don't think the same kind of colonialism happened to us. I would support that with, our creative writers, the work that they produced, and I would refer to this progressive writers movement because that was the time when these people started writing about, not about otherworldly things or about, supernatural stuff. They started writing about issues that were very relevant to everyday man and everyday woman and people around them. They wrote about almost everything except colonialism. If we had had the kind of colonialism that was meted out to people in the Caribbean and people in Africa, our writers would definitely have written about them. So what we are doing right now is that we are sort of buying the narrative of colonialism and the subsequent post-colonialism. We are buying the narrative of post-colonialism from the Caribbean and the global north. This is the reason why Derek Walcott writes Omeros. He is given Nobel Prize for that, because that in its essence is a post-colonial text. While our people can't produce or didn't produce anything of that level or that magnitude, because perhaps colonialism of that extent or that intensity didn't happen to our people. So as Dr. Safir Saab was also saying, that the project of post-colonialism has badly failed in this part of the world. Why? Because we are still there. We are still borrowing theories and stuff and literary texts from the people around us. Secondly, when you are saying that can we record our creative writings, and can we have a repository of that? Can we take out some time for that? I believe the answer to this question was there in Dr. Saab's answer that he gave to one of the questions before you, when he said that we have been so much engulfed in our survival that we do not find that space for creative writing at all. Look around you, and this is part of the big project, I believe. Look around you, look at people. I won't say this is from the global north. I don't know how is it happening, but if you look at our own lives, how much time do we find how much time do we have for ourselves? How much space do we have for ourselves to write, to go for creative writing? We are so much engulfed in our very survival. Having said that, there is of course a need to write about our lives, because remember, carriers of memory, they are in two forms. I always say this, from Jen Asman and Elita Asman. They say that carriers of memory are in two forms: one, human carriers of memory, and two, non-human carriers of memory. Human carriers, you and me, we'll transfer our memories to the second generation, only half of that, and they'll transfer it to the third generation, 25% of that. The rest will be gone. So the non-human carriers of memory are cultural artifacts, poems, creative writing, and all that. We write that, we store it, we transfer it to people, the second generation, and then third generation and fourth generation. And this is how we preserve our memory. So there is always a need for that, but how much space or time do we find to actually do that? That's I believe the problem that we are having right now.
I would just like to add a few things. In fact, when Edward Said, when he made that contrapuntal reading of Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, I think, in a very prophetic manner, Edward Said was referring to, with implication to the spatial, to the need for spatial reading of the things. Like he talks of how Mansfield Park is maintained, how it's beautiful gardens and everything, and the entire space is maintained. That is because the black laborers are working in Antigua. Mr. Bertram owns plantations in Antigua and West Indies. So he refers to that, and he makes a kind of against the grain reading of Jane Austen's, goody Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. But at that time, Said was not completely focusing on the spatial. He was once again trying to, dig up the post-colonial argument by in fact going against the traditional reading of Jane Austen. But he referred to this idea of how the space can be looked at, and that is why I would like to say that even Hamlet should be looked at in terms of how space works in literature. I mean, why don't you want to get out of looking at the problem of delay in Hamlet only, or other things? just look at the battlements and how the things are spread out in the city, you can make a very good spatial reading of Hamlet and many other texts.
Dr.
Since
Sir,
we have not been focusing these things.
can we just quickly wrap up because we all have to...
20 seconds कोई देंगे मुझे?
Please.
20 seconds. You know, directly or indirectly, we have been associated with this colonial discourse, and directly or indirectly, we were there, and we are still somehow associated to this colonial discourse. अब देखिएगा डिप्टी नजीर अहमद early seeds of post colonial studies, हम जरा देखें इसको कि वो क्या कह रहे हैं. In one of his novels, फसाना मुब्तला, he dedicates this novel to William Mawer, और उनको जब वो उनकी शान में लिख रहे हैं तो क्या लिख रहे हैं? कहते हैं, अल्लाह अल्लाह वो भी क्या दिन थे कि सर विलियम मेवर ममालिक मगरब व शमाल के लेफ्टिनेंट गवर्नर थे. अब मुझे बताइएगा कि इज देयर एनी स्पेस ऑफ रेजिस्टेंस और इज ही एंजॉयिंग द स्पेस ऑफ कंप्लायंस और हार्मनी? सो हमारे यहां अब भी आपके सवाल ना, वी हैव द सेम सिमिलर स्पेस, है ना. अब वो क्या कहते हैं, और एम कैंपसन तालीम के डायरेक्टर, तालीम के एतबार से आखिरी लाइन वो ये कहते हैं कि यहां तक कि औरतों की तालीम का सिलसिला मुरतब हो गया. इन द नेक्स्ट नॉवेल दैट ही राइट्स, दैट इज मिरतुल उरूस दी स्टोरी, इट स्टार्ट्स विद दिस लाइन, एक बेवकूफ लड़की का ब्याह हो गया. द राइटर हिमसेल्फ सेज कि मेरी लड़की बेवकूफ थी. अब देखिएगा, यानी कि आप एक कॉलोनियल बड़े स्पेस में रह रहे हैं, बट स्टिल यू आर सो मच बायस्ड दैट यू फेल टू गिव प्रॉपर स्पेस टू योर कैरेक्टर. यानी आप खुद ही कह रहे हैं कि लड़की बेवकूफ है और उसका ब्याह हो गया और वो अकबरी थी. यानी व्हाट डज इट मीन? इट मीन्स द राइटर हिमसेल्फ इज, एंड स्टिल in many ways, directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously, our writers are also cartographers, and they are dividing and they are distributing spaces according to their own ideology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think it was a very enlightening discussion. And for the students, if you have any more questions, queries, I think you should continue this conversation. You can email any one of these professors, and there's always space for more research ideas. This is what these conferences are for. So with that, I will I think we should call it a day.
Respected audience, we thank you for your interest and cooperation. We're also highly grateful to our distinguished keynote speaker, our panelists and moderator for honoring us with their invaluable time and enriching this conference with their presence.
I would now invite our organizer and focal person, Dr. Rabia Amir, for rapporteur's report. Dr. Rabia Amir is an assistant professor of English at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, Namal, Islamabad. She is an HEC approved supervisor and a former awardee of PhD research fellowship at the Department of English and Comparative Literature, Columbus University, New York, US. Ma'am, please.
Thank you. I'm going to just make it as short as possible, but it's going to be a quick wrap up of the whole day's proceedings. And ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Pro-Rector Academics, Dean FH, my worthy colleagues, and my students. We are now on the close of this conference about the spatial turn in literature and linguistic foregrounds the importance of interstitial spaces of literary, linguistic, and filmic narratives from the local realms that tend to subvert the pervasive modes of defining spatiality. That's the take-home thing that we need to look at. And by inaugurating this conference, the Faculty of Arts and Humanities has the honor to have pioneered this discussion about space and place for the first time in Pakistan. And when Edward Soya, he talks about Edenic Los Angeles with its specific seaport and all these things, at the same time, he draws our attention towards what covered the forgetting, reimagining of linguistic ardor of Spanish cleansing, ethnic cleansing, of Spanish-speaking people. So in the inaugural session, we had Professor Dr. Caroline Miles, who also brought home the importance to convey geographic information through maps and storytelling. So that's a very interesting and a very good technique that we can make use of. And she emphasized storytelling powered by a place. So mapping people's journey, she was talking in Mexican-American border, in the context of that, but we, as DG reminded us, that we can appropriate that on Afghan-Pakistan border also, and we can talk about that. Professor Dr. Anis Ahmed was our chief guest, and he talked about the Western social science, and he called it a malaise, unless and until we have, we talk about and we subvert or psyche needed to be understood by Western psychology, but he said that it has to be interdisciplinary. Literature needs to be interdisciplinary in order to make space for our understandings. Then the second session was about the keynote speaker was Professor Dr. Almut Degner. And she talked about spatial language and some reasons why we should study it. And that was a very interesting take because she talked about environment, how environment shapes spatial language. And she was talking about evidence for social photography. Social topography. So that's an interesting area that you, as researchers, can tap into. And she gave us insight into the domains of egocentric, allocentric, geocentric aspects of language, and again, environmental language. In the second panel discussion with our worthy Dr. Zawar as moderator, we talked about the metrolingualism with the panelists, Professor Ayaz Afsar, Dr. Amjad Salim from Peshawar, and Dr. Anila Gill. And they all emphasized as a basic need for the connectivity. They're like language as is power, and we need to develop a difference and dissent with academic acumen. So we need to develop that academic acumen, right? They also talked about, very interestingly, origin, spread space, absolute space, and metaphorical spaces, as we extended that in this session, as we saw being extended here. So researchers have been studying the political hegemony of English, but the answer is metro language that was suggested by Dr. Amjad Salim, that would replace heterolingualism and localizing English by being glocal. So that was session 2, and the last session, I'm not going to speak a lot about it because this was just, we still have that Tashnagi abhi remaining in our talk. So Professor Safir Awan, he talked about geographies of discontent, who and where is the post-colonial, and that was a very interesting dimension that we really need to look into at this point in time. So he brought home the need to bring new critical approaches to our literary prowess, a departure from the traditional ways of research, and bring out-of-the-box understanding of literature and life. And that would change the direction of our understanding of geocriticism. And panel discussion 3 with moderator Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari, Dr. Inayatullah, Dr. Sibghat, and Dr. Farooq Nadeem as panelists. I still want to listen to more, but we are short on time. So the last, here we talked about the heterotopias functioning as spaces that preserve memory, as Dr. Inayat talked about it. And there was a discussion about the aesthetic dimension to heterotopia. We are living in a times of anthropocosmology. I really liked this term. And spatial conditioning, we need to have a spatial conditioning that is possible only with a context, as Dr. Farooq Nadeem talked about. Compartmentalization is cartographical. Moving forward, Dr. Sibghat also talked about, talking in the context of the English patient. He talked about the concept of photography and as ruin lust. And that's actually a very interesting domain that we can work in. Then we also talked about digital spaces with urban spaces as conditioned with mobility and became more important than more important and brought this capitalistic crisis sort of. And last but not the least, the line would be a balanced space with the positive implications for our survival and sustainability is what is required of us. So with this, I wind it up. Thank you.
Now I will invite Honorable Pro-Rector Academics, Professor Dr. Amar Ijaz, for a vote of thanks.
खोल आंख, ज़मीं देख, फलक देख, फजा देख, मशरिक से निकलते सूरज को जरा देख। उठ के अब बस में जहां का और ही अंदाज है, मशरिक व मगरिब में तेरे दौर का आगाज है। This is Allama Iqbal. He said to Muslims of this region about almost a century ago. Dean, Faculty of Arts and Humanities, HODs, panelists of different sessions, faculty members, conference participants, and dear students, Assalamu alaikum. This daunting task has been given to me to close today's workshop or conference. It's heartening to see the people are sitting here at this twilight of evening's session. I'm afraid they are not forcefully made to sit here. They are sitting here willingly. It's great pleasure for me to address you students, and I'm sure you must have enriched your minds this whole today's exercise and conference. You must have learned a lot from the presenters, how to present your ideas. And this conference of today's conference, one day on spatial turn in literature and linguistics. This is my second month here since I joined as a Pro-Rector Academics. And it is a matter of great indeed heartening to see an institution like this, NAMAL, have taken so much strides in such a short time, where you have reached so far 15,000 students in this campus, and the number of activities which have gone through. Almost every week there is a conference on some topic, on some area, in some departments happening. Not only that, the students are given opportunities to discuss and question the panelists, especially the current affairs panels and the level of discipline which I have encountered here is really worth seeing and commendable. I will not go through these pages, what's been given to me. I will just only talk two things from my heart. That in Quran, The word knowledge, ilm, has appeared at 780 places in verses, which is 1/3 of Quran, which talks about to urge, to struggle, to do research. It says, for those there are hidden treasures. Hidden treasures for those who urge for it, who strive for it. And we must do it. That maybe those treasures are here on this planet, on this earth. They may be on other planets as well. We are living in a universe which comprised of 200 to 400 billions of such planets. Our earth is revolving around sun. The light which comes here, which a photon of light, particles of light, which emits from 8.47 minutes before it reaches the earth. It travels with a speed of 300 million meters per second. What point which I wanted to make, I will tell you at the end. Now, our government 2018 survey, 19th budget, they are spending around $257 million on education. $1,100 million were kept for our defense purpose out of our total income of $5,661 million. So think whether this meager amount with this $257 million, can we compete with our rivalries or with developed nations? Whereas MIT's budget, only that institution's budget, it's about $576 million only for that MIT's. So we have to ask our writers, our teachers, to write about it and convince our policymakers to increase this budget from 2% on education to 4%. Only then we will be able to see the change in our universities, in our laboratories, in the training of our teachers, and the facilities which our students would have. Second thing, the point which I want to say before I leave, that now the trend is changing, but it's very slow in our country. We, as a Muslim nation, we are not used to doing research. तहकीक जिसे हम कहते हैं. We need to crack the definition of knowledge and ilm. By virtue of that wrong definition, some of our people, they get off the track. We need to correct our definition of ilm, knowledge. If we look at the developed nations, they develop their policies methodically, painstakingly, and then they implement it. We, as a Muslim nation, we don't know what losses have been incurred to us. This is due to our lack of knowledge, lack of research. It's been written in nature that for those nations who stop doing research, stop pondering, stop thinking. They will be made enslaved. They will be enslaved. They will be made slave. That's what happened with us. We stopped thinking. Why not we write? Why not we do research how much loss we have incurred? Gillian Polya, an Australian writer. He is a medical doctor, MBBS. Later he did PhD as well. He wrote a book in 2005, which was published in 2007. If you go to net, you can see that the book is Body Count, Global Avoidable Mortalities. He writes that from 1950, 1950 से लेकर from 1950 to 2005, during these 55 years, there are 1.3 billion, 1.3 अरब लोग, 1.3 billion people got killed. And more astonishing fact, he writes further, that out of this 1.3 billion, 60 crores, 0.6 billion, they were Muslims. Why not any Muslim have this courage to do this research? And then he further writes that there is a silent genocide happening of Muslims. Then he, as genocide is a crime. He further writes, then he filed a case against NATO, Britain, and America against this genocide. People write about Holocaust, but nobody talks about this genocide. So this is only will happen when our Muslims start doing research. They start finding the facts. In Iraq war, you know how many people got killed? It used to be a prosperous country. They had $40,000 doctors. Before war, now they are left only with 16,000 doctors. The rest of them moved from that country. And there are about 7 billion homeless after the war. 5 billion children became orphans. 3 billion women got widows. And 3.5 billion kids are living below poverty. So this has all happened because of our lack of knowledge, technology. I know I have short time, I have to complete. Thanking of all. This shows that you also are fed up of listening me. I want to at the end thankful to all the keynote speakers, Professor Dr. Caroline Miles, Professor of English from United States, Texas University, Edinburgh, Professor Dr. Helmut Degener, Professor of South Asian Languages from Germany, Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan of Namal University, and all the moderators and panelists of 2 sessions. All of them deserve my deepest appreciation. Finally, I'm thankful to the Dean of Faculty of Arts and Humanities and the focal person of this conference, for organizing this wonderful international conference successfully. I hope they will continue arranging such thought-provoking and intellectual events in future also. Thank you very much. Before I leave, Ahmad Nadeem Qasmi's stanzas, "ए खुदा मेरी अर्ज़ पाक पे उतरे, वो फसले गुल जिसे अंदेशा ज़वाल ना हो। यहाँ जो फूल खिले वो खिला रहे सदियों, यहाँ खजा को गुजरने की भी मजाल ना हो। खुदा मेरे एक भी हमवतन के लिए हयात जुर्म ना हो, जिंदगी वबाल ना हो। थैंक यू वेरी मच। पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद।
I would like to request Pro-Rector Academics, Professor Dr. Amar Ejaz, to please distribute the shields and certificates among the keynote speaker, the moderator, panelists, and focal person of this session too.
As Professor Dr. Muhammad Safir Awan and Dr. Uzma Abid Ansari are not present, we will share their shields and certificates with them. For now,
students, just settle down. All right, don't get up from your seats. Settle down, we are about to leave. And you need to let the guests leave before you leave. All right?
Dr. Sibghatullah Khan. Dr. Farooq Nadeem. Dr. Sibghatullah Khan. Dr. Farooq Nadeem. Now I would request our worthy organizer and focal person, Dr. Rabia Ahmed, to please come and receive your certificate and shield from the Honorable Pro-Rector Academics, Namal, Islamabad.
Dear audience, because of the time constraints regarding Maghrib prayer, the certificates for the organizing committee and the faculty members and the student volunteers will be distributed in an upcoming ceremony about which you will be notified soon. Now I request all our guest speakers and members of the organizing committee to gather for a group photo inside the IT auditorium, after which we can all have some refreshments. Thank you. All the student volunteers and faculty members of the organizing committee, come along for the group photo.